Hey all, it's Webcamparrot here, with a video on honestly one of the most overpowered characters I have ever talked about on this channel, and one that has absolutely earned his place in the title of this video. Magic the Gathering's most notorious villain, the Planeswalker Nicol Bolas. They may even be competing for the most hacked out character in fiction, and probably one of the only guys who could actually potentially square up to the God Emperor of Mankind on equal ground. One of the things that I really enjoy about this character is that Bolas is just totally and utterly irredeemably evil. He does not have a sad backstory, all he is a giant egotistical jerk who looks down on everyone and regularly lets them know it. Most of this video is going to be about the numerous times that Bolas has totally, mercilessly humiliated and destroyed anyone that got in his way, and the powers that he needed to do it. I'll be going over 3 different versions of the Forever Serpent in this video. His weakest state as a post-mending planeswalker after the multiverse was mended, the former immense power he had as an Oldwalker or original planeswalker before the mending, and finally, the form he took at the height of his power as Dragon God of the Multiverse and wielder of the Elder Spell. Something that all 3 of these versions should have access to in equal degree is his famous mind-rending touch, which I think is just a great place to start showing you guys just how silly some of his powers can get. Just by touching someone, which need not be with a direct physical touch, Bolas can produce effects ranging from subtle and fine-tuned to totally destructive and devastating with a wide range of different effects. This touch can manipulate and take control of your behaviour, affecting your thoughts and emotions so subtly that you may never even realise that you are being controlled at all. Or he can fully ramp it up into a mind-rending surge that would turn a normal mortal's mind to ash in moments, which the powerful dragon Niv Mizzet was only barely able to withstand, even for a few instants. It will shatter your mind and send all thoughts screaming from the thinker, and has won Bolas countless thousands of duels. Even the pre-mending planeswalker Teferi was almost totally destroyed by this effect, his body going into seizure, scrambling his mind, disintegrating his physical essence, and threatening to crush his spirit all at the same time. At its most extreme, this touch will cause your body to convulse, your lungs to burst, and your blood to boil, as your mind is totally drained as you are burned, drowned, starved, and made fat, split asunder and torn into a million pieces, only to be instantly reassembled endlessly for all time. Which he mostly just did to be a giant jerk, because Bolas is Bolas. Even this weakest version of him, his post-mending state, was considered significantly more powerful than Niv Mizzet by the Perun himself, which was affirmed multiple times, who believed that Nicol would legitimately be a threat to all of the plane of Ravnica in its current state. On Amonkhet, he not only created an entire second sun for the plane, but also used his telekinesis to carefully control its orbit to fit within his schemes. Bolas is feared as one of, if not the most powerful living planeswalker, with his brother Ugin being his only real rival, and for good reason, as Bolas has been a threat to entire planes of existence before. The card, "This world belongs to me," has Bolas quoted saying that he has created entire worlds and extinguished twice as many in his time as a planeswalker. This was again reiterated in the Hour of Revelation, where we are told that Bolas has created his own worlds before. He was even directly witnessed turning the entire plane of Scala into white-hot fire with his powers. We are told during the Ice Age block that planes can vary in size, with most being infinitely large, or at the very least containing an infinite amount of mana that Bolas would need to overpower either way. For instance, Mirrodin, or New Phyrexia if you prefer, despite being relatively small, is home to the Myr Reservoir, which is said to contain a bottomless supply of mana thanks to its connection to the mana core at the centre of the plane. Similarly, the power within the Hedron network containing the Eldrazi on Zendikar, which uses the energy from the plane's world soul to function, is stated to be limitless, and was channeled there by Nissa in the first place using the ley lines. However, when they fought during Hour of Devastation, Bolas not only directly showed us that his own control of the ley lines was far greater than her own, but we also see on the card Nissa's defeat, he is quoted saying that world souls even of this magnitude would be something that he is gladly capable of killing. To add consistency to this, the Hell Vault, which was created by Pre-Mending Sorin and destroyed by Liliana with the Chain Veil, was infinite in size, and was so large on the inside that even a Pre-Mending Nahiri could not planeswalk out of it. Nissa was then able to at least partly generate the necessary power to turn Innistrad's entire moon into a giant Hell Vault to contain Emrakul using the ley lines of Innistrad. Again, Bolas is more powerful and better at this exact thing than Nissa in the first place, and it's just very consistently represented that planes in Magic the Gathering just do hold an infinite amount of mana by default. The plane of Theros in particular contains Nyx, which is said to be an endless realm created by the beliefs of humans on Theros, and has within it multiple infinite-sized locales like the Mystic Sea. Likewise, another part of Theros, the Underworld, also contains infinite-sized regions inside of it, and the river Tartix that connects the Underworld to the Living Realm is infinite itself. Despite this immense scope, and the powers that the gods of Theros must wield, Kruphix, the god of mysteries, who knows everything that is known on Theros, and is one of the most powerful gods, believed that if Bolas decided to set his sights on the plane, even the gods might be powerless to stop him. Similarly, Ugin, Yasova Dragonclaw, and Bolas himself all believed that it was totally within his power to completely destroy the plane of Tarkir, something that he would have done just to prevent Ugin's regeneration there, or even just to spite him. So Bolas, even in his weakened state, sits quite comfortably in the universal plus to low multiversal range. But brute force isn't really his style in the first place. It's his immense degree of planning and special abilities that makes him so threatening. Death magic in particular is a favourite of his, which he used against Niv-Mizzet several times, creating coils of power that would kill anything that touched them, or unleashing black lightning that would instantly slay and turn to dust anything it hit. The card Soul Manipulation is quoted telling us that Bolas finds both life and death to be easily reversible, something that presumably is done through soul-based abilities, and the card Hour of Devastation tells us that he can kill others on a whim, with the card itself even removing invulnerability. Not an unusual occurrence for Bolas, as both in the card Gideon's Defeat and the story Hour of Devastation, Bolas was capable of stripping Gideon of his famous invulnerability and could have killed him at any time, which, spoilers, is exactly what ended up happening, although in a slightly different way. Not only this, but Bolas's own defenses are even greater than Gideon's invulnerability. When the Black Sword, a special soul-drinking weapon that had already killed major demons, elder dragons, and gods before, shattered on Bolas's head thanks to the preparations he had already put in place for that exact occurrence, but the shattered remnants of the blade had no problems punching right through Gideon's invulnerability. Along with many of these Death Hacks abilities comes both Existence Erasure and the ability to directly affect the soul. Bolas nearly totally burned out Jace's soul with nothing but his mind in the Agents of Artifice book, and in Shards of Alara he threatened to send the dragon Malfagor's soul into a zombified husk under the control of some third-rate necromancer to punish him. On Amonkhet, during Hour of Revelation, he even cast a spell directly in front of its gods, completely erasing the bodies and souls of every adult on the entire plane. Additionally, Bolas knows an unmaking spell, which would totally tear apart a normal person's body and mind, and that even the pre-mending planeswalker Leshrac was badly affected by. Similarly, he can release a black orb that spills out a great shower of black sparks that dissolve anything they touch into absolute nothingness, and can directly manipulate and shape these twisting lines of void energy which also erase whatever they touch. Much of this erasure is far stronger than it sounds, as it's effective even on Planeswalkers, who can traverse and survive even the erasing effects of the Blind Eternities, an outerversal realm that exists between the planes of the multiverse that not only destroys your mind, body and soul, something that even ghosts are destroyed by, but also totally erases you from the memories of those you once knew, which I will go more into in a future MTG Cosmology video. Bolas, who is of course a Planeswalker himself, can also therefore travel the outerversal distance between the planes and can withstand the existence erasure there. He should likewise just be able to dump other characters straight into the Blind Eternities to destroy them like other Planeswalkers can, and as is implied by the unsummon card flavor texts, although he's unlikely to resort to this as it's going to use a lot more energy than just casting an erasure spell or a death spell. We also see this resistance to erasure displayed by Sorin when he survived the leftover energy of Ugin's corpse that threatened to tear him apart on the most fundamental fibers of his being if it wasn't for his Planeswalker spark protecting him. Summoning is of course also something that Planeswalkers are very adept at, with some notable Bolas minions being the gods and people of Amonkhet, which he zombified and coated in Lazutep, in order to bring them safely through the Blind Eternities with him. His domination of the gods of Amonkhet was totally absolute, with him describing it as something akin to storing tools within your cupboard for later use. Bolas corrupted and manipulated the ley lines of mana within Amonkhet to rewrite the destinies and origins of the gods there, instead tying their existence to himself and forcing them to erase all else. Of course, a great deal of mental manipulation went into this endeavour as well, another signature specialty of the Elder Dragon, which we can see represented in the Slave of Bolas card. Despite the magical Heckma barrier protecting the denizens of Amonkhet from harm, the immortal god Kefnet had her mind split in two with nothing but a tiny flick of Nicol's chin, and he later waved his claw to erase the minds of the gods Oketra and Hazaret. He also corrupted and distorted the angels of the plane, forcing them to take on a form similar to his own, and to serve his every whim. And when the Sphinx of the plane proved to be too resilient for the same treatment, he cursed them with silence, preventing them from communicating in any sense at all, either through their voices, their writing, or even direct telepathic communication. Of course, this mental domination isn't limited to the plane of Amonkhet, as on Ravnica, he got his claws into the mind of a Dimir Thought Stealer, despite their own mental abilities and expertise in this area, which he then puppeteered up to Niv Mizzet's bedroom as he slept, just to expertly slip a secret through the guild leader's special mental defences with masterful care, scrambling and rearranging the Dimir agent's mind afterwards to perfectly fit into his plans and to evade the forensic scrutiny of Niv Mizzet afterwards. Which shows that not only does Bolas have like a really powerful mind himself, but even when he's using a puppet with much weaker faculties like this Dimir Thought Stealer, he's so skilled that he can still navigate around one of the plane's most powerful and skilled mind mages. Jace Beleren, who is similarly an expert mind mage that has gotten the upper hand on Niv Mizzet in this area in the past, was totally out of his depth against Bolas, who completely outmaneuvered and trapped him mentally, threatening to subject Jace to total mind death. In a later encounter, after Jace had prepared and improved his mental capabilities, he was still immediately defeated by Bolas, who erased his mind entirely. We can see these encounters represented on the card Jace's Defeat. Similarly, another Bolas scheme card, Every Dream a Nightmare, represents his ability to influence the minds and dreams of others with his powers. On top of this, he has access to some pretty nasty power drain, which we can see represented on the cards Disciple of Bolas and Liliana's Defeat, which is particularly impressive with Liliana as her own power is not something to be taken lightly. We see that Bolas often combines these life and power draining effects with another blue staple that is one of his specialties, that being Counter Magic, or Power Nullification if you prefer. Both the cards Mana Drain and Counter Squall show his propensity for using these two abilities in tandem. All of the abilities that I've already mentioned and will continue to mention throughout this video are the kind of things that Bolas can just negate with a counterspell of his own. He can even reflect attacks back similar to his own like this, instead subjecting the caster to their effects, and can form protective magic webs that repel magic, which in this quote includes existence erasure. This extends to some capability to instinctively copy abilities that Bolas has only seen once, like when he copied Lesharak's special crystal spell that allowed him to protect himself not only the mind-rending touch of Bolas, which thanks to this Nicol can also repel, but also the death touch of Phage, which immediately rots and destroys anyone subjected to it. This ability to just counter, reverse, or copy basically any spell leveled at the dragon would be bad enough on its own, but Bolas is a master of multitasking and can very easily unleash physical and mental attacks simultaneously whilst throwing out counterspells or protective webs of magic, all whilst analysing and learning from his opponent on the fly, like he does in his fights against Ugin and Niv Mizzet. In his fight with Niv Mizzet, the two were launching easily 100 spells combined simultaneously, including counter magic, each of which would have totally occupied the mind of a regular mortal. Fighting Bolas requires totally unreasonable levels of multitasking and coordination, and if you mess up even one small detail, because of the severity of his abilities, it's just over instantly. Necromancy is of course another common tool in Bolas's repertoire, along with the massive plane-hopping army of Lazotep zombies and gods from Amonkhet. The Elder Dragon was able to wrest control of the erstwhile, a collection of Golgari undead from Vraska, even through the use of a puppet minion that he was only controlling mentally and from a totally different plane of existence, with him even saying that if the chips were down, he could easily take control of every single undead in the Golgari swarm and turn them against their masters on a whim, which needless to say represents a veritable army's worth of undead, if not several. This makes sense, as Nicol has claimed that he would be more than a fit replacement for Liliana's necromantic skills, who is herself elsewhere noted to be perhaps the multiverse's greatest necromancer. Nicol has access to some age manipulation as well, like when he ages his opponents so rapidly they immediately turn into dust and cease to exist, or the fact that he is fighting the process of his own aging with his powers. As a true Elder Dragon of Dominaria and direct spawn of the Dragon, Bolas was born with the gift of names, something that firstly allows dragons to name themselves from birth, taking control of their own destiny and conceptual identity, effectively protecting them from either being tampered with by others, and secondly allows a dragon to instinctively observe and understand the purpose or lifestyle of different beings at a glance, also immediately knowing their names. Ugin, who had only recently been born that very same day, was able to recognise that bacteria existed on the plane of Dominaria, immediately understanding their place in the food chain. Additionally, dragons have a natural resistance to poisons and can only be harmed by a special kind of magic poison that, as it turns out, Bolas knows how to create. Even incredibly grievous wounds like the kind caused by Nicol's caustic acid spells that left Ugin's limbs numb and his eyes swelled over would have eventually healed in time thanks to his Draconic Physiology. Of course, Bolas's own regen is vastly superior to this after becoming a Planeswalker, which we see after his battle with Niv Mizzet, where his wounds are seen to heal within seconds. Chandra's fire, which was even capable of burning out the Eldrazi completely, was totally ineffective on Bolas entirely, with him mocking the Pyromancer for trying to use fire against a dragon. A number of his abilities don't fit into the neat boxes that I have been trying to put them in here, and in some cases are only represented a single time or a handful of times, like his control of sealing, which can not only be used to seal away beings like the gods of Amonkhet, but of course also unseal them. He can also control the vectors of objects, affecting their speed and force like he did here when he stopped a spear mid-flight just by glancing at it. Or alternatively, he can just completely dissolve the projectile in mid-flight like he does to this godly arrow. The display of power that he was showing here was also so great that the gods of Amonkhet believed that he could defy the laws of nature at will. For instance, Bolas can remove himself one half step from reality, making it impossible for others to attack him conventionally, but still allowing him to cast spells that might affect them just fine. The Elder Dragon can also of course simply teleport out of the way of incoming attacks, Against Teferi, he even used a spell that totally flattened him into a 2D object, something that the old Planeswalker only survived thanks to his pre-mending spark. The Elder Dragon also emits this ominous aura of fear with his magic that can make even the stalwart, experienced and powerful Planeswalkers Teferi and Jace unable to properly react like a deer caught in headlights. Bolas is very capable of disguising himself as an ordinary human, which even masters of espionage have trouble identifying. Nicol was also the one to teach Ral Zarek to turn his tiny sparks of electricity and rain magic into dangerous and powerful thunderbolts or gouts of white-hot plasma. Bolas can unleash clouds of decaying miasma that would rot or make sick anything that touched them. And at the end of the War of the Spark, Gathering Storm, we also see that Nicol has these strange spiritual projections which he uses to possess and control others mentally, which seems to work even when their target is in a totally different plane of existence to himself. Bolas can also create huge and complex sculptures or buildings out of his powers in a few moments, like the creation of his citadel and obelisk on Ravnica. Nicol's innate senses and ability to perceive what's going on around him is vast as well, with him being able to immediately recognise that Gatewatch was on the plane of Ravnica, even through the invisibility spell cast by Jace, which he found so weak that it was even insulting to him. In War of the Spark Gathering Storm, Kaya kills the entirety of the Ghost Council, including Grandmaster Karlov, and as a result was metaphysically affected by the various magical and legal contracts affecting the Council, inheriting them. These contracts would either kill or drive Kaya into madness if she ever broke them, which included planeswalking away from Ravnica. The greatest lore mages of the Orzhov sect were unable to figure out a solution to this problem, but Bolas claimed that as an expert in lore magic, which had been part of his repertoire for millennia, that he could easily undo these very same curses, implying that he could also cast them himself if he wanted to, as they were originally put in place by those very same lore mages. Which is far more impressive than even that sounds, as lore mages in Magic the Gathering can literally make their words laws of the universe, even if they're very localized. Like if a lore mage tells you you can't go somewhere and they are strong enough, you literally just will not be able to go there. We see his expertise on this matter utilized through Liliana's contract, which defaulted to him when the demons it was originally made out to died, forcing her to abide by his commands or suffer immediate death as a result of the lore magic. As for his speed, it's obviously worth noting that he is a planeswalker and can therefore travel outerversal distances if he so chooses, but also that even after the mending, it's stated his powers can reach across the multiverse and the blind eternities to claim some of the objects of his desire. Of course, reacting to and countering lightning or light-based spells and magic is incredibly trivial for him as well. Now, there is some stuff I would like to include from the book Tests of Metal, which is a book for Tezzeret, but it is worth noting that some of the material in here heavily conflicts with other canon material, and that some of the descriptions that we find within the book are as a result of Tezzeret's comprised mental state at the time. However, all of the material I'm about to go over now shouldn't conflict with any other canon material, and in some cases, like with the Liliana clone, must have some truth to it for things like War of the Spark to go down as they did. Even so, it's possible that this next section isn't actually canon at all, which is a shame because I personally quite enjoyed this book, and most of what goes on here actually lines up really well with what we know Bolas is already capable of. One major ability established in this story is something known as clockworking, which is a form of space-time manipulation that is thought of as even more potent than Chronomancy, the school of magic that controls time, and that can even directly overwrite the effects of Chronomancy within its area of control. Tying it back into the speed section, clockworkers can move through time as though it were just another spatial dimension, which would qualify for immeasurable speed, allowing them to move through time at will, and to launch attacks or arrive somewhere before they even left. Bolas learned clockworking mostly as a hobby before its power was relevant to him prior to the mending, and uses it to see into the future by looking directly at the quantum smear of possible moments, implying that he can also perceive things on the quantum level. Adept clockworkers like Bolas can not only see the future, but can also actively choose to switch over to whatever nearby future is most appealing to them, effectively controlling fate as well. He also used it to create several time duplicates of some of the other characters, including Liliana and of course himself. Clockworkers can create localized hypertemporal fields to age their opponents rapidly into dust. It can also be used to reverse any damage that was taken and to strike back at any opponent before they were even hit in the first place. Another example of immeasurable speed, or age you to death, and which again even normal time magic cannot protect you from. These same temporal effects can be used to create hypo-temporal barriers that prevent anyone inside from being hit by attacks, kind of like a force field. The object is continuously slowed down before eventually just stopping entirely and floating in the air harmlessly. We also find out in this book just how detailed and advanced Bolas's brain is. Even regular dragons have a number of different subminds located in special neural ganglia throughout their spine that can think independently of their brain. Their multitasking ability is far beyond any human's imagination, and Nicol Bolas's capabilities were beyond the imaginations of even other dragons. He's taken his over 25,000 years of experience and carefully organised it into a neatly categorised mental structure that allows him to access information immediately, and in the process had split off functions of cognitive processing to create virtual minds who can manage different tasks or skills without him having to tell them to. For instance, during a battle, he was able to focus on multiple different aspects of a complex set of situations and manage them all independently, with his different subminds as he was fighting Tezzeret. His different subminds are able to launch spells or attacks without any need for input from him, simultaneously accessing the part of Tezzeret's armour that existed in the Blind Eternities and shifting it into a weapon that would attack its wearer. This also helps to explain what I went over earlier in his battle against Ugin, where Bolas was utilising a great array of different attacks and tactics simultaneously, just like he did against Niv-Mizzet as well. Bolas's mind is even directly stated to be 4th dimensional in scope, and can handle 5th dimensional geometric calculations with only some difficulty. It's also acknowledged within the book that the Seekers of Karmot who taught Tezzeret everything he knows about the ethereum his body made out of, and his ability to sculpt, shape and manipulate metal, were actually created by Bolas, who knows everything that they know. As a result, he should have many of the same abilities as Tezzeret does, including the ability to cancel out or counter magic with metal, and the extreme precise control of metal that Tezzeret has. The control of metal he learned indirectly from Bolas is so great that he can create perfectly smooth automaton constructions so perfect and flush with their local environment that they seem almost totally invisible to other observers. Tezzeret can also make these strange metal collars that make it easier for people like Bolas to control them mentally. Some other assorted abilities are also demonstrated throughout the novel. Against the Planeswalker Boltris, Bolas was able to put them to sleep with a simple gesture, despite them having protection spells up at the time, a typical thing for him to do. A version of himself travelled from an alternate timeline that was further into the future, and just by glancing at him, Bolas was able to recognise and know exactly how strong he was, which likely has something to do with a dragon's innate ability to know names and the concepts of things that I mentioned earlier. The most bizarre thing he does in the whole book is probably erasing himself from existence, and seemingly even the history of the plane he was on, even wiping out his footprints, and was totally fine and unharmed later. However, all of this power pales in comparison to the strength he had prior to the mending of the multiverse as an Oldwalker, a power that Bolas tells us made his clockworking prowess practically irrelevant, as he was a functionally omnipotent master of space and time. Oldwalkers had total mastery over their bodies, which were practically an afterthought to them, having a transcendent mind separate from their physical form, which effectively allows them to bring themselves back from death. Teferi was able to recover even after he was stabbed through the head, and later when he was decapitated, thanks to this Oldwalker capabilities. Of course, in his battle against Bolas, his entire physical body was even erased from existence, and his mind was totally scrambled, and he was still able to recover thanks to this. Oldwalkers are effectively entirely immortal and are able to process the entire endless multiverse with their minds of infinite scope. It's stated more than once that they wield infinite power on this scale and have minds that are literally infinite in size. Even compared to these beyond godlike beings, Bolas was immensely powerful and could have mapped the entire multiverse and the blind eternities if he had wanted to. He had no need for food, rest or air, and could take the form of pure consciousness and light at will. Prior to the Mending, Bolas's reach extended across the whole multiverse, and anything he wanted he could reach out and take with barely a thought. His mind encompassed and extended across entire worlds. During this time, he was able to merge the 5 planes of Alara, harnessing and absorbing all 5 types of mana from them. Against Teferi, he was able to split his opponent's essence in 2, leaving his body and mind both sundered, with each half of his consciousness longing for the missing half, leaving him unable to act properly and totally consumed by distress. In this same encounter, Teferi attempted to trap Bolas within a time cage, leaving him frozen completely in time as well as space, with his thoughts, deeds and spells alike totally suspended. But Bolas found all of this unimpressive, easily shrugging it off, implying that he could do this himself to someone else as well. The dragon tells us that this sort of thing was inconsequential to him compared to his centuries outside of existence, separate from time or place in the blind eternities. He was thrown there when in the past he had been defeated and the resulting energies of his death had totally annihilated the plane of existence he was residing on. Death in that moment tried to claim him, but he tells us that he was still a dragon and goes only where he pleases. Even when his mind, body and spirit were broken, his indomitable will remained and allowed him to gradually return from death to reclaim his power. In his fight with an ancient planeswalker that we know only as the demonic Leviathan, Bolas inadvertently created an infinitely large time rift in the fabric of the multiverse, which he was later able to repair. The aforementioned Leviathan was defeated by Bolas when he tore apart its mind, and over the next year would consume its arcane-ridden flesh, claiming its power for his own. However, Bolas's most powerful version is the one that we see not long after he cast the Elder Spell, which required him absorbing the Planeswalker sparks of hundreds of other walkers in a scheme that he had been planning for many years. Once the spell was cast, he gained power comparable to his pre-mending state in seconds, and gained some other benefits besides this. Bolas states that with this power he was going to remake the entire multiverse, which is infinitely large in his image, and that he was one with all things.
I will remake the multiverse in my image. Everything is power, and I am everything.
To add to both this and his Oldwalker state, Bolas tells us that his former power before the Mending was so vast that he was as far above Niv Mizzet, who is fairly relative to his post-Mending state, as Niv Mizzet is above the lowest creatures on Ravnica. Meaning that if post-Mending Bolas is 4D or scales to universal amounts of power, then this Oldwalker or Elderspell version of himself should be at least 5D. With the power of the Elderspell within him, he has access to all of the abilities of every Planeswalker that he absorbed during the casting of the spell, which we can see represented on the Nicol Bolas Dragon God card. Now, it's unclear exactly what all the abilities he gained from this were, and it would be far too much work to actually go over all the possible Planeswalker abilities that he would be able to gain or could have in this state, but suffice to say, it was a lot. Ultimately, this state was short-lived as it was undone by the very spark harvesting methods he put in place, and had his name stolen by Ugin, sealed away within the meditation realm, now his prison, and forgotten by the rest of the multiverse. For now. Anyway, I'm sure you can all see why I consider this guy such a powerhouse, and possibly one of the most hacked characters in fiction. But that's it for this video. There will probably be a Magic the Gathering Cosmology video in the future, so look out for that, and I'll see you all in the next one.